Supervisors to order. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing. Following the Pledge of Allegiance will be a silent moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will have the reading of the notice, please.
An educational meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors will be held at the Marathon County Courthouse Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street, Wausau, at 7 p.m. on October 20th, and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. And I would like to request everyone please silence their cell phones and or any other electronic devices as to not to be an interruption to the meeting, and I thank you for your compliance on that. And we'll proceed to roll call, and I request everyone please sign in. And thank you for that. And I would like to welcome all of the visitors that we have with us this evening, including our viewing audience. And we will move on to item number 7. Item number 7 is public comment. No one approached the chair? Did anybody approach the clerk? And no, they did not. So we will move on to item number 8, educational presentation reports. The 2023 budget message and process. And I would invite the chair of HR Finance Committee, John Robinson. Supervisor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just start out by thanking Administrator Lance Leonard, the Deputy Administrator Chris Holman, Chris Cordes, our Finance Director, and all the department heads for their work on developing the 2023 budget. Administrator Leonard is going to give an overview of the budget, and then I will wrap that up with what the committee has done to date, and then look at the process going forward.
Thank you, Committee Chair Robinson. Thank you, Chair Gibbs, Vice Chair McEwen, and all members of the County Board. It is my pleasure to present the budget to all of you and have this opportunity to speak briefly on the budget. Just a couple introductory remarks. You know, it's really been a goal of staff, myself, and all of our team to provide as much information as possible. We've really tried to add context to a budget that I fully appreciate, and then speaking with a number of you, I know you appreciate as well. That is very complex. County government itself is quite a complex level of government. And I was looking today, and I was struck by the 2023 proposed budget. I know it's 141 pages, so I hope you all have a pleasure reviewing it. But it is nearly 4 times as long as the 2020 proposed budget, which was 36 pages. So I hope those additional pages are more than just additional information. I hope they are additional insight. I want to begin by, as alluded to by Committee Chair Robinson, you know, putting this budget together was truly a team effort. All of the department heads did an exceptional job, as I referenced in the budget message itself. Our team, Christy and the rest of the team from Finance, Deputy Administrator Holman, other members within administration, and certainly Sarah Severson, our communications and marketing strategist, or communications and engagement strategist, excuse me. She did an exceptional job trying to, again, provide information in a way that I hope adds context and contributes to your understanding. I'm not going to go through a complete presentation of the budget like I did at HR Finance and Property. I anticipated talking for 45 minutes at the committee, and I think I talked for 2.5 hours. So I'm not gonna do that for you today. I know Chair Gibbs and Committee Chair Robinson sent out an email that had a link to the proposed budget itself, and also 2 links to the presentation that I made and the questions that the committee had. And I certainly, I know each of you will review those and reach out if you had questions. But I just wanted to take a couple minutes to highlight a couple of pieces of the budget. And really, it's going to come from my introductory letter to all of you. I really do believe that this budget, the budget proposal, and certainly the amendments that were offered and adopted at the HR Finance and Property Committee really do address the community's priorities as identified by this board. And it ensures that the organization functions as efficiently and effectively as possible moving forward. As a team, as I referenced in my letter, we really did challenge ourselves to evaluate opportunities for increasing non-tax revenues, adopting alternative service delivery models, which I talk about, and sharing or reducing staff as a means to really not only build a sustainable budget this year, but build a sustainable budget plan moving forward. So as I indicated, I'm very proud, and I know our staff are very proud of the budget that we delivered to the committee and that you're going to consider moving forward. Just to highlight a couple of the areas, I refer to them in the budget message as investments. Investments in our people. We developed a budget and presented a budget that does provide for the implementation of the compensation schedule that was developed in concert with the HR Finance and Property Committee through working with McGrath. We developed a budget that continues to allocate funding for the consultant relative to health care delivery that has quite honestly been a very wise investment. It has paid for itself multiple times. It has been instrumental in that sustainable future planning that I referenced before. And also in terms of investments in our people, I think we made an important public safety investment through the utilization of some of the American Rescue Plan Act funds for the limited term position, the victim witness specialist within the district attorney's office, to coincide with the allocation that was received from the state of Wisconsin. In terms of infrastructure, which is vitally important to our sustainable future, again, the capital improvement program meets it delivers on the requirements set by the HR Finance Committee and the board. The plan itself, the capital funding plan, provides for full funding for necessary routine and end-of-life maintenance for our buildings and our IT infrastructure. We also made some significant IT investments in terms of IT security. And the funding plan does provide for considerable additional investment in roads and bridge projects to maximize general transportation aid eligible spending, which has been a focus, certainly a focus of the Infrastructure Committee over the last several months, and in fact, even into last term. Another investment that I want to talk about are really investments in opportunities for innovation, just highlighting a couple of those. The $50,000 that is allocated in the budget to the Extension Education Economic Development Committee, I think, is an important step on that, in that direction. That committee historically did receive a similar allocation a number of years ago, but ultimately the committee decided several terms ago to take that money and invest it in a position with UW Extension. At least for this budget, I think having those $50,000 there to really aid the committee and the full board in determining what the county's role is with respect to several of the challenges facing the county, most notably, as I call out, challenges relative to access to high-quality childcare and housing, I think is a wise investment. Continued funding for entrepreneurial education through McDevco is also vitally important, as that committee has heard, the Extension Education Economic Development Committee. McDevco has done well in delivering that education through the Entrepreneurial Center on 72nd Avenue and stimulating small business growth, so the budget continues to provide for that funding. It also provides for funding for a data officer position, which from the moment I arrived in administration, county administration a number of years ago, has been a common refrain, not only from staff, but certainly from the board. What does the data show? And we have a lot of data. We have a lot of databases. I'm not sure we gather a lot of great insight from that data. And the investment in the budget to create that position is an investment in hoping to gain that insight. And then finally, in terms of an opportunity for innovation, we did provide for, through the budget, the continued funding for the implementation of our new website platform, which really seeks to enhance the public's ability to access information and services. As I have framed it to staff, we need to move our website from, we need to be more like Amazon and less like Britannica. So those are the opportunities for innovation, and again, the opportunities for investments in people and infrastructure. I also think it's really important just to highlight a couple of areas where we're really working to mitigate future risk. And one of the primary deliveries from HR Finance and Property and from the full board on the budget was develop a capital funding plan that had no new debt. And the plan that was presented to the committee did that. There was no new debt incurred, no new borrowing through that capital funding plan. We also adopted conservative sales tax revenue estimates based on the uncertain economic future that I think we all are feeling. That's the environment we're living in at this time. And we also made some strategic budget reductions within library reserves, trying to stay in line with that target, work toward that target that was adopted in last year's budget relative to reserves. And then finally, in terms of mitigating risk, ARPA funds were used sparingly in that budget. There were ARPA funds in terms of spending were allocated, as I referenced before, for the district attorney's office position, the county share of that position. And then also it was utilized, $404,200 was utilized to cover significant increases in the utility costs that we were experiencing. And I included a section of the budget to really try to demonstrate or illustrate, perhaps is a better word, the impact of inflation in some key areas. So that's an overview of the budget. I understand it's a relatively brief one. I want to close my comments with, if you have any questions at any time, if you're reviewing the budget message, the 141 pages, or you're watching the recordings, please don't hesitate to call my office. You can send me an email. I'm always happy to take time to answer any questions. Similarly, as Chair Robinson's going to talk about the process moving forward, I am always available. I certainly would appreciate it if you do want to offer an amendment. Please, my door is always open. Send me an email if you have a goal you want to accomplish. I'm happy to sit down with you and try to understand what that is and offer my thoughts on how best perhaps to accomplish that. And as Chair Robinson's going to talk about, we have a process that we utilized last year that I think served the board well, which was providing for Corporation Counsel and Finance Director Palmer to assist in the completion of that budget amendment document that we utilize, again, identifying a source of funding and the corresponding expense for any budget amendment. So with that, thank you, Chair Gibbs, and I'll turn it back over to Chair Robinson to talk more about the process moving forward.
Thank you for that overview. The administrator presented the budget to the HR Finance Committee, and we accepted it. At that point in time, it no longer is the administrator's budget, but rather the county board's budget for 2023. We had a meeting on Monday to look at what changes we would like to see, and there were changes to the capital improvement funding scheme, as well as putting additional funds in for North Central Health Care. And let me deal with each of them. We added $1,850,000 to the North Central Health Care budget on a one-time basis to deal with their budget deficits associated with outpatient services, the Mount View Care site in youth behavioral health hospital. Those deficits are associated with decreased utilization. In the case of Mount View Care, we had this, a number of people were out with COVID, and we had to replace them to maintain staffing ratios, and we couldn't during periods of time accept new patients, which led to an increase in costs. In the youth behavioral health hospital, we just haven't seen the referrals from other counties coming in. Their total deficit for those three activities is $2.4 million. We felt that it was prudent at this time to take the ARPA dollars, $1,850,000 for those lost revenues or behavioral health services and supplement it. We will be getting a full report on their budget at an upcoming meeting. I know that acting CEO McBain and Gary Elson, the finance director, are trying to get their arms around the situation there, but we've been assured that this will help them right the ship, if you will, and move forward. The second change that we made, there were a number of changes relative to the funding for the capital improvement plan. We moved the Marathon Park water system out of the capital improvement plan funding to ARPA. That's $950,000. That is consistent with the action that the board took earlier when we paid for the design work. It's an water infrastructure related activity that is eligible for ARPA. We then moved $805,007 out of the highway reserves for bituminous into the capital improvement plan, saving those highway reserves for future days. And then we moved the carpet replacement in the courthouse, $62,000, out of the small projects, small KIP, into the capital improvement program, as well as the Lakeview parking lot at $79,993. The capital improvement program was set up for emergency situations. For instance, if a boiler goes out, a hot water heater goes out, and we were allocating that, and we wouldn't have had reserves should we have had an unforeseen capital need going forward. So we felt that it was prudent to try to protect that small capital improvement sort of contingency fund, for lack of a better term, for those projects as they develop, and invariably they do through the course of the year. So those changes were made. You received the email from the chair and myself laying out the process, and we are obviously at the meeting where we're talking about the budget. On Thursday, November 3rd, there will be a hearing on the budget, and you will be able to float your ideas and comments at that time. We would ask that by Friday, November 4th, any amendments that are being proposed be provided to administration so they can be looked at and make sure that we're paying, the amendments are paid for. On Wednesday, November 9th, the HR Finance and Property Committee will meet to review those amendments and make recommendations. Ultimately, those decisions are yours on what we do. And then finally, on November 10th, we will have the budget and the capital improvement plan before you for your review and approval. So with that, are there any questions?
Any questions? I don't see any. Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my first question is, what impact on the budget does the class compensation plan have? What number of dollars are we talking about if that is approved?
Those funds are budgeted in the budget. I believe it's $1.8 million. Total cost of 2.4, but there are other entities such as our
ADRC.
Adult Disabilities Resource Center, the airport, and other entities that are funded out, not through the levy. But I'll let the administrator answer that.
Thank you. That information is set forth on pages 28 and 29 of the budget. Really, it's page 28. That total amount for the fiscal impact that it's set forth in the resolution that you'll look at today is $1,583,814.78. That's for the tax levy related impact for the implementation based on our implementation strategy that we've developed, and that's the impact in 2023. The overall increase in budgeted payroll is $2,690,672. That's the last line on that page. And as Committee Chair Robinson referenced, the reason for that, just to give a little bit of context, there are certain departments, like I referenced in my presentation to HR, Finance, and Property, not every dollar in the budget is created equal. There are certain departments that their payroll is entirely funded by their operations. So Central Wisconsin Airport, for example, and the Solid Waste Department. So there is no tax levy going into those departments for the administration and implementation of this plan. Similarly, although a little different, the Aging Disability Resource Center of Central Wisconsin, they follow our class compensation policies. However, their levy amount, as provided for within this budget, is the same as the levy amount has been for a number of years. They are charged with implementing this schedule through other additional revenues. And then finally, the other class of departments that we have are those departments where a significant portion of their compensation for employees is provided for, through other alternative revenues, and that would be, for example, the Highway Department. They receive a significant amount of funding from the state of Wisconsin. Similarly, Social Services, the Health Department, they are offset by either direct allocations from the state or from grants.
Okay, other questions? Supervisor Marshall.
Yes, on page 32, you talk about the change in the right start or start right model. And it said that this new model is going to save $370-some thousand. What was the original amount of the right start model, or how much does that leave for a budget? Thank you.
I can find that information for you. I will certainly get it for you. I don't have it right at my fingertips. But I would add one thing, and I think it's referenced on that. It's $370,000 this year, and because there are some implementation costs included with joining that consortium, but that amount is projected to increase substantially into future years. So I believe it's 600. It's in excess of $600,000 in future years, but I can certainly get you the answer on the start right budget.
Okay, Supervisor Sandalski.
Can you give me some explanation on the design at the library for the chiller replacement? So that's just for the design for $275,000?
Yes.
Other questions? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I understand this correctly, we're increasing the budget about 8.5% and the tax levy by about 9.5%, and with no increase in staff.
Correct.
And you also mentioned the tax levy at 4.55. You refer to the Green Book in your presentation. You said it was the median rate. Actually, the average rate in the Green Book is 3.80, as opposed to the median, so we're below the median, but we're actually above the average for all the counties in the state. I just wanted to point that out.
Other questions? Supervisor Sandalski.
I just got a question about our employees here at the county. So how many employees did we have at the end of 2021 versus the employment today?
Page 24.
Thank you. Quicker when you're online than on paper. So as Committee Chair Robinson referenced on page 24 of the budget, it indicates there were 704.13 positions within the county at the end of 2021 and 2023. Through the budget, there are 706.72 positions that are funded, which is the same number that is projected at the end of 2022.
So how many people are actually staffed right now as of today?
Thank you. So we have 76 vacancies. I should clarify with respect to the FTEs that are budgeted, as alluded to in my budget message relative to the adjustments that were made, we do budget for attrition within several departments. So the 706.72 positions are the FTE positions that are provided for in the budget, not taking into account that budgeting for attrition. That's the FTE count, full-time equivalent count.
Supervisor Shafinsky.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. I would like to just call attention to the tax increase, the property tax increase, and we're looking at the estimate is $74, and this is on page 10, the bottom of page 10, average homeowner impact. And my point here is I think it's a little bit disingenuous, because we walk through the process and say, well, we took the levy down. It would have gone up to $80-some or $90-some. Instead, we're only going up to $74. But if you look back over the last 10, 15 years, you know, the average is in the $15 or $20 range. And here we're coming along and raising the rate. We're raising the property tax on the average homeowner $74. And we're using as an excuse to do that the fact that their property value went up. The point I'm making here is people don't buy homes to watch the property value go up unless they're speculating. Most of us buy homes to live in them. So I think that particular commentary is not, it's a little disingenuous.
Well, part of that increase is debt service, and that debt service is taken on because of NCHC's inability to fund the debt service that this board has approved in prior years. Supervisor Cavalli. Okay. Supervisor Robinson.
I was just going to piggyback on that. We are constrained in terms of the levy. There's the levy, and there are some things that are above the levy. And those that are above the levy are your debt service, your library, and your culverts and bridge aid, which are separate entities, and not all communities are covered by the library and the culverts and bridge aid. But in the case of the debt service that is based upon previous borrowings that this board approved on a 3/4 vote. And it is also a result of North Central not being able to carry that debt. And at some point in the future, they will repay the county for that. But during this budget year, we need to make the payments, and it's reflected in there. But what was our net new construction, 1.27 or 47?
The net new construction percentage? Or
Percentage.
1.7, was it 1.76, Christie, or 1.74? or 1.72. In terms of dollars, it's 856,000, I believe.
And just so the board is aware, just prior to this meeting, we had an NCHC meeting, we had a tentative discussion, and as alluded to by the Chair of Finance, NCHC, North Central Healthcare, is looking at a budget that is balanced, and so I think that is a huge improvement in where we're moving forward. So I believe that at some point in the future, they will be able to help and at some point service that debt. So next is Supervisor Baker.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So recently in the media and also in some of the Health and Human Services Committee, there's been discussion about family keys being put back in the budget. And just so there's clarity, can you address if the grant is in the budget and then what the changes, if any, would be?
Yes, the grant is in the budget based on the action taken at Health and Human Services to direct me to put it in there. It is a equal revenue, equal to expense. So all of the grant dollars coming in are expended through the budget. So there's no additional contribution to any balance. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
That answers half of my question, but were there, in the media, there were suggestions that the program format had changed? Can you address that?
Yes, and it was discussed at Health and Human Services. Each of the primary three concerns that were referenced by the board in their discussion were taken back by staff and in conversations with the Department of Children and Families. Each of those were addressed, and I'm going off the top of my head, so I apologize if I missed one, but it is in the recorded meeting and the presentation that was made by the Social Services Director, Tilka. But first and foremost, the congregate living aspect was addressed. The new program design and working with the Department of Children and Families is for single-family rental units to be utilized and have that. The second part is to address the concern about Marathon County serving as a landlord. The rental agreements will be signed not by Marathon County. That will be done through the individual participants with a third party that would be secured through a request for proposals by Marathon County during that process. And the last piece was a concern that individuals would not leave the rental unit. It's very much in line with the second modification that I referenced. There's no real risk to Marathon County any longer. We're not serving as landlord. And actually the aim of this new design would be that should the place of residence that the individuals would eventually procure and live in during their period of continued involvement with social services, should that be viable long-term, they can stay there and they have that lease in place. So it really addresses a couple of additional concerns. But those were the big three things that were addressed through Department of Children and Families and staff, and the vote at Health and Human Services to direct administration to put that in the budget was unanimous.
Thank you.
Supervisor Oberbeck.
Yes, thank you, Chair. One of my questions is, have we ever done an analysis on TIF funding throughout Marathon County? One of the issues with that is as we approve new TIFs, and the county is part of that, that we analyze how much is out there. The city is proposing a new development that will go on for 27 years or so as far as funding. So I wonder how much this is impacting the county as far as net new revenue from this new development. And I think that's something that we should analyze and look as we make decisions on TIFs. We should look at how our budget is being restricted by that approval. So I think that would be something I'd like to see as an analysis of what is out there and when it will be retired and when it will be coming into the funding stream for all the entities in Marathon County.
Supervisor Robinson has a response to the question. Supervisor Overbeck, please.
I think that those are concerns that have been expressed by multiple members of the HR Finance Property Committee, and I'm looking at Supervisor Marshall and Supervisor Lemmer and Chair Gibbs and others. So the committee is developing a work plan for what it will spend its second meeting of the month working on, and tax increment finance districts are on that list and at the top of that list. So we want to have a better understanding of what we can do relative to the Joint Review Board, who should be on that Joint Review Board, under what conditions should we be approving it. It isn't only the initial plan, but it's sometimes the amendments and the extensions of those plans that have an impact upon the taxpayers throughout the county. So we are looking at it.
Okay, next we have Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the first comment, I appreciate Supervisor Baker bringing up Family Keys and the action that was taken. I'm going to say I'm disappointed that it was not included in the administrator's budget displayed to us, because it was something that we actually had rejected as a budget transfer. And so to suggest that we are to watch a video of another meeting that we're not a part of to get that information where it should have been presented to us, I'm disappointed in that. There is additional cost. Anytime you accept a grant, anytime you accept any free, quote unquote, free money, there is the use of resources of the people, the 706.72 staff that we have, in order to carry out that grant. You can hire someone else, but there are meetings that will need to take place. There is work that needs to be done by people who are staff. So I think it behooves us to really understand that when we take, quote unquote, free money, it adds to our work. It adds to the work plan, it adds to the services that we're providing, and it adds to our overhead costs, whether it be where we need to house those people, what kind of computers we need to give to those people. It adds to the $218 million part of our budget, which was $199 last year. My concern about Family Keys was not addressed, and is precisely what I mentioned right there. So I appreciate your comment. I do not appreciate that it was not explicitly listed or discussed in this budget. Second point, we have $5 million in additional tax levy. My question is, these are actual costs to the taxpayer, as another supervisor brought up. What is the individual taxpayer homeowner getting for that increase in our budget? What is the average person getting out of this budget for that increase? Third comment. What cuts have we made? Significant cuts have we made in this budget to help reduce that levy, to help reduce the total budget? Are there significant cuts that you can say to us right now that we really attempted to do this, this, and this to reduce cost? You mentioned in the beginning that something about sharing or reducing staff. We have the same amount of staff from the previous year, so obviously we're not reducing staff. So what is the sharing of staff? So those are my points. The two questions specifically, what is the taxpayer getting for this increase in this budget, which is significant? Let's not make any mistake. We've had 2% increases and now we're at 9%. It's significant. So what is the average taxpayer getting for that cost? And number two, what are the significant cuts made? Thank you.
As I referenced in my introductory letter, I asked every department essentially look at a number of things. And my goal to them was to cut their operational budget by 2%. And I'll pull up the budget document. And this is also discussed in the presentation I made to HR Finance and Property. When you look at the departmental 5-year budgets, you'll see that a fair number came in with flat or negative increases over previous years. Administration, just for example, down 0.54%. The clerk of courts down 0.7% in terms of tax levy. Conservation, planning, and zoning was up significantly, but as was described at the meeting, that was the transfer. We transferred 2 full-time equivalent staff based on the board's approval of that plan in 2022 from the county treasurer's office to conservation, planning, and zoning. Corporation counsel, similarly, down 2.93%. And I won't go through all of these, but we did cut a position within the corporation counsel's office. We did not fund the position. We added the data officer position within administration. We have a vacant position that credit to your question about office staff sharing, as referenced in the budget narratives for each of the departments within the clerk's office, the county clerk's office. Clerk Trueblood is currently 1 staff short, 25% of her staff. That staff position, she's evaluating whether or not it's necessary to fill that, and if so, in what capacity. The veteran service officer as well has allocated part of her staff. She has, I believe it's 2.75 staff within her department. That 0.75 staff person has assisted in a number of departments with a number of tasks over the last more than a year, including the district attorney's office to address workload issues within that department. With respect to cuts that were made within the various departments, there was a question previously about service level or model changes, I should say. The model change within the health department, I think, is exactly what you're alluding to in terms of how can we be more efficient and more wise with respect to the tax dollar, being good stewards of the tax dollar. We are doing that. Within the sheriff's office, similarly, we worked with county administration, worked with the sheriff's office and the Department of Social Services to evaluate operations of our shelter home facility. So you'll see that the shelter home is no longer on the 5-year. You'll see a significant increase, significant decrease in overall tax levy, $418,786. The $68,000 remaining are essentially funds necessary to wrap up operations and continue to maintain the facility in which we used to operate the shelter home. We're going to do that a different way in 2023. We're changing the model that we utilize for that. And then you look at social services, they are increased 0.74%. A significant amount of that, and it exceeds, in fact, the levy increase of $54,566. That's tax levy that was transferred from the sheriff's office shelter home budget to deliver the shelter home services within social services, but to deliver it in a different way. So the sheriff's office budget is probably, between the sheriff's office and highway, are the 2 budgets that were increased in terms of levy allocation most significantly. Those are driven by increases with respect to staffing costs, and there are increases with respect to the operations that we have that require vendor contracts. I referenced within my budget the increased costs of our jail meals over previous years. That is significant. We're working in terms of how we can do that more efficiently, partnering with North Central Healthcare. In fact, I had meetings with the chief deputy and the jail administrator yesterday with North Central Healthcare staff and our facility staff to start to evaluate how to carry that out. So in terms of cuts, we certainly have budgeted tighter. We have evaluated opportunities to be more efficient. Again, I believe in my presentation to HR Finance and Property, I covered a fair amount of that. With respect to the increase in overall budget from 199, just shy of 200 million, to the $215 million that was proposed. I can go through and talk about, bear with me for a moment, I can identify where those costs came from with respect to our budget, and I certainly, if Christie has anything she wants to add, I can do that, but if you give me a moment, Mr. Chair, I can identify the sources of increased funds with respect to that, in addition to the debt service that was already mentioned.
Well, debt service and ARPA funds were part of that utilization of that increase from the 199, almost 200 million to the 215. So, anyway.
So the highway department, which I referenced before, in terms of overall increase, you'll see a increase in terms of tax levy of 367,979. But in terms of overall revenue and expense, you'll see an increase of approximately $8 million. With respect to debt, that was previously mentioned on debt service, we have $3.75 million. Central Wisconsin Airport debt is also up $431,363. The Central Wisconsin Airport budget is up $511,280. Special education, which is funded through allocations from the various school districts, it's not truly a Marathon County department, is up $84,201. Support for other agencies is up $515,981. That's primarily comprised of the allocation to CCIT, which is up, in fact, over $515,000. It's $528,481. The ADRC similarly is up $1.3 million. There is no levy increase with respect to the ADRC, but its overall budget. We have, Christie, am I missing anything else?
No, but there's, bridge aid is another one that we can't, that's basically a function of the bridges that were done that we already made a partnership with the municipalities. It's up to $612,500 from $480 from last year. Debt service contributes the most to that. The other one that he's not really bringing up that is important is that we did fill more highway levy with some of their fund balance and trying to mitigate some of the reductions that received, particularly $250,000 in general transportation aids as well. So that gap was filled without levy. There's also an increase in sales tax, which tried to mitigate some of the tax levy needed for debt service and general operations. So it's not only what the impact of the tax levy is, it's the other revenues that we're trying to generate in order to offset continuing operations in several of the departments.
Supervisor Shafinsky.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I'd like to address the Family Keys program, and I'm express my disappointment that that was not brought back before this board explicitly and openly. Rather, it was kind of backdoored, put back into the budget when this board rejected it originally. So I'm disappointed in that approach. I look at that, and we constantly use the term, well, but it's a grant, but it's a grant, but it's a grant. Grants run out, and programs tend to live forever. So if there's a hypothetical grant for $1 million for the next 3 years, in year 4, the program's still there, and now the county's on the hook for $1 million, or maybe it's $1.2 million, or whatever the number is. So to say that but there's no budget impact because it's a grant just pushes that out the window. And at the end of the grant period, we're stuck with a program that nobody's willing to kill. So I think that needs to come back before the board openly and have another discussion and not have it be backdoored in at a committee level. The other thing I'd like to address is looking at the overall increase. I don't think that we're really being aware of the fact that most of our the people in this county are looking at a 10, 15, 20% increase in their home heating bills. They're looking at double the gas price in terms of what they are going to pay for the year. They're looking at everything's going up 10, 15, 20%. I think for us to come along and then add to that level of inflation is irresponsible. I think we need to work harder at being much tighter on our increase, and you know, we need to pull as tight as we possibly can, even to the point where budgets don't go up for some departments at all. And again, the ARPA funding is the same thing. We say, but it's ARPA. Well, no, it's not free money. And if we increase a budget this year to ARPA, then next year we're going to say, but we spent $2 million last year. We still want to spend $2 million, and we want to spend $2.1 million. So it gets baked into the books going forward. Thank you.
Supervisor Wilhelm.
Thank you, Chairman. I had a question related to the employee pay increase. Right now, I've been watching interest rates go up, and I think home values may end up coming down. Now, with that kind of increase, is there a chance that we could give a smaller increase over the year-over-year raise system and give bonuses to compensate employees, just in case we do have that factor later on where maybe home values do go down and we don't have the tax base that we do have right now? Just something I was wondering if we could maybe think about it.
I'll answer your question and then I'll add my comment. We can do whatever you as a board direct us to do. But for context, the $1.5 million for the class compensation study is, depending on how you evaluate total tax levy departments, between 4.07% of an increase in payroll. To Supervisor Sherfinsky's point about individuals that are impacted by inflation, increased heating bills, and the like, those people work here too. They're watching this meeting, and you know, they are seeing the increases that you're seeing in other areas of the market for positions. Other local governments in our region that did an 8% across the board raise. That's not what our system does. Our system is a pay-for-performance system. We pay for results in terms of progress on delineated goals within the department and within the appraisals of individuals. Again, the equation of what we're talking about based on that is approximately 4%. We backed out wages out of many of the departments based on what it would cost to implement the pay plan based on our analysis. So within administration, for example, we budgeted 8% because that was the budget assumption set by HR Finance based on the inflation and what other markets were doing in terms of increases for wages. It did not, our anticipated implementation cost within the administration department was less than 8%. We did not leave 8% within the administration budget. We backed out that difference. We had a number of departments that the cost to implement was greater. Central Wisconsin Airport is one. That was 10.7 is my recollection. We did not fund 10.7 and they did not fund 10.7 within their budget. They will be challenged, just like other departments, the medical examiner's office for one, to do that through the budget process. But to your first question, we can implement whatever you, as the policy-making body, direct. I will simply say, we went through a process, and HR Finance and Property Committee can talk through the analysis they went through. It was led by a professional. They laid out the methodology they were going to utilize, the comparables that they utilized, and their methodology for making sure that the comparables were appropriate for the positions that were laid out. And that approach was adopted by the HR Finance and Property Committee. Then the analysis came back with an initial recommendation to adopt a market target of 5% above market. In working with our consultant, we did not do that. The class compensation study before you takes into, and it's later in your budget, later in your agenda, takes into account what you indicated that the market is contracting, and also the limited funds that we have. We set our compensation schedule at market with the understanding that we will not do what we have done over the last 10 years, which is not do a comprehensive analysis during that time. For this compensation study to work, we have to look at it again shortly, within the next 3 years. But to your specific question, we can do whatever this body, I will make happen, whatever you direct me to make happen. I will be blunt. There will be consequences to that. We have many employees who have expressed very clearly in many departments, they are waiting for this because we have asked them to wait. We have 76 open positions. We've had 16% attrition. We need to adjust our compensation schedule. I'm telling you that as your administrator. There are many things I will tell you that you will not like, but I will always be honest with you. We need to adopt a new compensation schedule.
I would just expand upon that. There is consequences to, as the administrator said, this board can adopt whatever it chooses to adopt. But understand that we have, at HR Finance Committee, we took it very seriously when we looked at this compensation study. We have not done a compensation study in comparison to market for over 10 years. And that has resulted in challenges in the sheriff's department, and the consequences of not having deputies in the jail results in next year we have a budget of $1 million for out-of-county placements. That cost is what it's costing us to house those individuals in other counties because we don't have the staff to utilize in our own jail. Now, is the compensation one part of it? It is one part of it. But again, I encourage you to look at this in its totality and what we have to be competitive with the market, but we don't need to be, above market. And that's what the HR Finance Committee did. They said, let's set the market at what the market is. Should we choose something different? Again, there will be consequences, and we will have shortages in staff. Supervisor Baker.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. I have a two-part question. The first one will be fairly easy to answer, the next a little harder. I am going to use the Highway Department as to illustrate my question, but I could speak to any of the departments. So in the Highway Department, we have $40 million, $400,000 in expenses, $30,600,000 in revenues, and $9,800,000 in tax levy. We are funding, of that $40 million, it's my understanding that we're funding $9,359,621 from the highway fund balance. which of those three numbers does that 9,300,000 show up in? Does that show up in revenues and expenses, or is that not included in any of those numbers? That's my first question.
I'm not sure where the tax levy shows up. Is that?
The 9,359,000 in the highway fund balance, that's obviously not coming out of tax levy.
Oh, yeah, they're pretty close numbers. The tax levy is like
Right.
9.32, so
No,
I'm sorry.
right.
Yep.
But is that 9,359,000, is that included in revenues?
Yes, it's actually included in both. So what it is a revenue coming in under miscellaneous revenue. It's it's actually transfer in from fund balance. So it's actually coming into the highway fund as a revenue called transfer from fund balance. And then the offsetting expenses are in the highway department's expenditures. Typically, they will be in the 284 or 278 subfunds, so they're either going to be raw materials or capital projects or bituminous.
Okay, so specifically, is that 9,300,000, is that included in the 40 million or?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought, but I just wanted to clear. You stay there because you'll go ahead to answer my second question. So I asked for more detail at a HR finance meeting, and Administrator Leonard and Finance Director Christie provided me with a 600 and some page printout, and I wanted to thank you for that. I appreciate that very much. I spent a fair bit of time looking at that and did not answer all my questions, as you both suggested that would be the case. So my question is, as our role as both setting policy for the county and oversight for the county, if I wanted to know what the 40,406,000 roughly, what makes up that 4 million, where would I go to find that? How would I get that information? Where in the budget or in other county documents? How could I find that information?
The most easiest place is the actual document that I provided. That document is actually the way that they will import into the actual accounting system. Unfortunately, it's a document that comes directly out of our accounting system, but since our accounting system is 28 and a half years old, it creates a Word document. So there's really not a lot of different ways I can slice it for you. But anything that would be imported directly into the accounting system is in that larger PDF document we provided.
So the PDF file that you sent?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
If I could add one other thing, and I think to your point, Supervisor Baker, it's difficult when you look at the 637-page document to really gather insight, which is the reason we try to, through the budget narrative portions, and I would point to page 29, beginning on 29 and onto page 30, that talks about how highway funding is allocated relative to projects, and then also the capital improvement funding plan. But I certainly appreciate the comment that the 637-page line item budget by department and subfund is difficult to discern what that means. I am hopeful, as Christy alluded to, that with the implementation of our new accounting software, that we will have a better opportunity to deliver more meaningful insight to the board in terms of where our funding, where our revenues are coming from and where our funding is going. My one challenge to the board moving forward, and I appreciated the conversation you and I had earlier, is, what would success look like for the board? I can speak for the last several years as your administrator. I've tried to, as I said before, provide additional insight, provide additional context, but I don't know what all of you want in terms of reporting without you showing me or telling me what exactly that is. Our current limitations with respect to our financial system are such that I can provide you the 637-page document. There's a hard copy in the clerk's office. and I can work to provide this document that is on the website. But if there's a certain amount of financial reporting or some explanation that you're looking for, please let us know. Supervisor Baker referenced a presentation to me from Brown County. And I went and watched Brown County's county executive deliver that budget presentation. That's the reason that within your narrative section, you not only have the average homeowner chart that we've utilized for many years, but I added that supplemental chart about what is the impact when you hold the home value constant. I borrowed that directly from Brown County. I didn't ask first, but I put in our data into their approach for that reason. Supervisor Baker indicated that he thought Brown County's presentation was valuable. I went and looked at it. So if you do have those things you want to see moving forward, please, staff would appreciate that direction.
Thank you for that. So just to clarify, the part of the Brown County, it wasn't the presentation per se that I thought was valuable. I did not watch that. It's on their website under the budget section, and I'll send you a link if you want to distribute that to everyone. But basically, it is their budget presentation, but not a video. And it gives like how many people are in each department, what their pay rates are. It breaks down very concisely, but in detail, what each department budget is made up of. And you had suggested yesterday that as we ran out of time, but that I should provide you with, that you would appreciate me providing more information on what success looks like. And I am working with Corporation Counsel Pernier to hopefully be able to provide a amendment to the budget that would help get to that point, for the board's consideration. So it's just to give you a heads up that may be coming if Michael and I can come up with something that makes sense. So thank you.
One of the things that Finance Committee has requested, is comparison and budget to actual year-to-date. And the limitations of our current system, 28 and a half years old, made in Canada, and not to bash the Canadian company that made the program. However, it has limitations, and it does not, and there is many workarounds that the finance department has utilized over the years and drafted various different programs. PayBud is just a prime example. So we don't have the tools in some cases that even HR Finance Committee has been requesting. That is why this board, this entity, has approved a $2+ million upgrade to that system called Workday. We hope to be in a much better position to provide additional information to this board as we move forward and the implementation of Workday moving forward. Supervisor Marshall is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things I observed was on our healthcare costs that despite our FTEs being about equal, if I take the 3.9% increase on the 11.5 million, that's about 350,000 of the tax levy increase. So because we've kept the amount charged to the employee the same, that 3.9% is part of that increase that I believe Supervisor Dickinson had asked. And then I do have one question. If I look at the 4.3 million that we provide to North Central Healthcare on an annual basis, and then the 1.85 million that we're providing to bail them out on ARPA funds, and then we're also providing by paying their debt service of 2.4 million, are we in this budget giving North Central Healthcare essentially $8.6 million? Is that how I'm to look at that?
I'll take the first part about health insurance, and then I'll try to do some math in my head as I'm talking. There actually is not any additional increase relative to health insurance. within the budget, and I don't know if my narrative was unclear, but we adopted that funding strategy, so there's no cost being passed on to employees, which I think is, again, it's one of the things that's helping us and why I think we're able to adopt that compensation strategy I talked about of essentially a 4%, 4.07% increase. As it relates to North Central Healthcare, the allocation to North Central, and I don't know, Supervisor Marshall, that email that I sent you, if you recall what page the North Central Healthcare reference I provided? 45. The $4,382,212, that is the same amount of levy support that we've provided since 2013. The additional debt service on behalf of North Central Healthcare earlier in the budget document, and I trust your math. It's just the lawyer in front of me that requires me, or the lawyer in me that requires me to verify it.
But let's be clear, the 1.85 is to backfill what is a deficit in 2022. So it's not really funding for 2023. It's funding for programs that are actually negative this year in 2022.
And with respect to the debt service that is provided for in the 2023 budget for projects that were done at North Central, the total amount is actually $3,349,571. And Christie, double check me on my recollection relative to debt service is that we serviced 2.6 million of the debt service, utilizing a combination of 2.1 million was sales tax and 500,000 was other interest income and miscellaneous revenues. So that is the component of the total $7,384,561. That's why only a much smaller percentage of that went onto debt service, not the full amount. And just for some historical context, last year the county had $1,869,481 of debt obligations that the Marathon County was directly responsible for, and Marathon County serviced that through the proposed budget that was adopted, that was serviced entirely through other revenues and not put on debt service levy.
Supervisor Langenhahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things. First of all, I think it's fair to say that during the budget process, it's uncommon for us to microanalyze any specific grant line item. But given the history of the board and the Family Keys grant program, would we be at a point where we could request an itemized budget from that program after it's been revised from the committee work this past month? And they'll have another couple of points after that.
I'm not sure I understand the question. There was are you looking for a breakdown of what the overall funding plan was with respect to the grant funds?
Yes, but we had a plan back in July. I'm assuming that's been revised because of the 3 points, correct?
It was, and my recollection is that was in the presentation to Health and Human Services that was presented and approved at the committee level for inclusion within the budget.
I looked at the packet, and there was 7 pages in that packet, and 4 of them that comprised the presentation I assumed was brought in front of the committee. There were no numbers on them at all.
Okay, I can check on that to see if
I guess what I'm getting at is that if somebody wanted that information, they could certainly request it at any point during the budget process right now. That's the point I'm trying to make. The other point that I was going to make was as far as the political will to cut something. I can't remember if it was 18 or 19 when we decided to make a change in our support to certain community nonprofits. And I think I left the courthouse at 1 a.m. after that hearing got done. So there's plenty of political will on this board to cut things. I wanted to cut more than what those nonprofits were allocated during that year. If that political will leads you to 1 o'clock meetings, so be it. The final point that I wanted to make was in regards to that meeting that was held by Health and Human Services earlier, I think it was on October 5th. I believe the clerk is responsible for providing notice to the public of that meeting as far as notifying them of a meeting taking place. Was notice properly given to the public? Oh. So the public would have been aware of the items that would have been discussed at that meeting. Thank you.
Supervisor Sandalski.
I just got one question on as far as the health insurance. Do they do like an annual, going to the capital market and check and like compare rates and as far as so we get the best bang for our buck?
As referenced within the budget, our process, at least the last 2 years, has been to retain a consultant, USI, to assist us in evaluating our claims history, evaluating our data, and engaging in conversations with our health insurer. And we have gone to market the last 2 years to compare rates, not only from other potential insurers, but also evaluate whether or not we wanted to become self-funded as opposed to fully insured. And that should be within the same pages that I referenced before, that history and that strategy. And we are building the reserve, and this budget continues to do that, building the health insurance reserve to position us well in the event that should the next time we go out to market, which based on my budget, I advise us to do that again next year. And our plan is to do that next year, and we have provided for the funding to do that next year. We will have the reserve in place to go self-funded if that is indeed the best course of action for the county. We have engaged HR Finance on that. That was discussed throughout the budget building process, whether or not to move self-funded or not. Ultimately, the consensus was to stay with Group Health Trust.
Thank you.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a couple comments. This will be my last comment, so you don't have to worry about me carrying on. The first thing is about the class compensation plan. You mentioned that in 3 years, we're going to have to revisit that. So before I go on, could you address what that means?
And the reason for that is to look at the market. It has been our experience that some positions, and you saw this in the class compensation study, when you compare our current schedule with the proposed schedule, some positions moved significantly, others did not. My advice, as referenced in the budget message and as we discussed at HR Finance, is we can't wait 10 years to see what changes. For example, the market relative to individuals with CDLs is such that they are commanding a significantly higher wage than they had in years past. And I don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 years, but IT security in particular, has seen considerable increase in market rates. And to deliver our best work, not to belabor the point, but the delivery of government services is a people business. And we need to make sure that we are able to retain and attract talent. So that's my point, that we need to look at it. I don't know what the next 3 years are going to do. My hope is that we adopt this proposed schedule and we go look at it in 3 years and no change necessary. That would make my life much easier. But I also, like I told you before, I might tell you things you don't like, but I'm always going to tell you what I believe to be the truth, and I think things are going to change in the next 3 years. I don't know what, but I think things are going to change.
Follow-up, Supervisor.
Yeah, thank you. In reference to that, this is one reason why we need more vision into the process. We need a better process because it is a people business. I had a quote, I don't have it in front of me here, when you were talking about that in the HR Finance marathon meeting. To say that we as supervisors, have to be looking at every committee meeting to follow along with the process, I think is unfair to the supervisors. We have this meeting, and if it goes to 1 a.m., it should go to 1 a.m. if we have good, legitimate questions. I had 3 pages of questions. There's 38 people here. We can add that up. We can be here all night. Or we could change the process where we don't have to be here till 1 in the morning or 2 in the morning, and that process can be HR Finance isn't the one who's getting the 2.5-hour briefing, but we are. Then we don't have to sit here and grind through all of these details. But in addition to that, we can't really grind through all of the details unless we have the 660-page tome that we all don't have. One person got it because he asked. And that brings me to another point. The individual reach out, I appreciate you saying that, but that shouldn't have to be. We should be provided with information, and then we can reach out here. To make a phone call or to have an office visit, that isn't equitable for all of us because we all have different schedules. I'm not condemning you. I'm trying to condemn the process that we're put here with numbers, with not detail of numbers, and then we're asked, make an adjustment, make an amendment. My goal is to reduce the size of government at all levels. 706 employees, maybe it can be 650, and we can deliver the same mandated services at a lower level and discretionary services at some level. But I can't do that unless I specifically reach out and get a 660-page tome, which I can't even read through unless I sit down with the finance director and then have an individual meeting with the administrator. Not condemning any person, but this process is not good. And the result is people feeling like maybe they can't ask questions or they don't know what to ask about. And if they do, they feel like they're stepping on someone's toes. So my goal is reduce the size of the government, find a more efficient government, get back, and that final point is, and you mentioned that maybe next year we would get this, and I think we had time to this year, but we have so much work to do, and that is get to what is mandated and what is discretionary so we can make the hard decisions that need to be made. Thank you.
I'll comment on a couple of those statements. First off, some of those questions have been asked of each of the standing committees. And we've had that discussion at the executive committee. And we've had the discussion about what is mandated and what is not mandated. And that becomes a slippery slope. I will just say this, that when you talk about mandated and then you go to the committee level, I'll use highway as an infrastructure as an example. And one of the examples is what is mandated versus what is not mandated. Now, what is mandated? We must provide, as a county, we must provide infrastructure into each township. Does that mean that we have to have blacktop roads into each township? No, we can make them gravel if we choose to. That's the level of service that we have to, as a board, make those decisions at each of those standing committees. Those discussions and questions have been asked of each of those standing committees. What level of service do you want to provide to the citizens of Marathon County? That question was brought to the Infrastructure Committee and discussed. They wanted to maintain a PACER rating of 7, which requires effectively 30 miles of road to be re-blacktopped every year, which has a cost, and maintaining a system that is currently in place. So when we talk about mandated versus non-mandated, it's all about level of service that this board adopts and the residents of the county expect. So I appreciate the question, and I totally understand the question about what is mandated and what is not mandated. Are we mandated to have a solid waste department? No. So I appreciate that. However, we've had this discussion about what is mandated and what is not mandated. Each of the six standing committees have had discussions about those mandated versus non-mandated services and level of services, and there was very limited adjustments by each of those standing committees as far as recommendations in building this year's budget. With that, I will move to Supervisor Shafinsky.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. And before I go into the points that I want to make, I also want to compliment both you and Administrator Leonard on the information that's been given thus far. Looking at all of the data in total, we are in a very difficult position. There are some aspects of our economic environment, if you will, that are making it very difficult for us to keep and attract employees. On the other hand, we are in other economic circumstances are making it very difficult for us to go back to our population and ask for a tax increase. So you're in the proverbial rock and a hard place, and you make that very well clear in document. So I think you've done a very good job with that. Having said that, I'm glad that you brought up level of service. And I'm going to go back, being basically a lifelong resident of Marathon County, I go back to, and I'm going to pick on the Highway Department, and it's a level of expectations of service. Growing up, when I got my driver's license, in winter, we did not expect every single street to be bare blacktop or bare cement. You know, some were worn down by the traffic level, and you got to the point where you saw mostly bare concrete or bare blacktop during parts of the winter season, depending on the snow level. But now you fast forward 30, 40, 50 years, and we've got this expectation that after every single snowstorm, we're going to have absolutely bare pavement, you know, within a day or two. And that's both at the county level, at the city level, municipal level, and it's a level of service. And I think one of the things that's baked into the equation is the constant expectation that we should be providing more service, a higher level of service, and there's this constant expectation of growth in what government is going to do for me as a citizen. And I think that's something that we need to step back and look at and say, is that really where we want to go, or do we need to back away from that model and go back to a more limited form of government and, you know, get back to a position where we're a little bit more within our means? So, thank you.
Supervisor Langenhahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quickly, because I know we still have the rest of the agenda to get through, but I do just want to make a couple comments in regards to future budgeting and this current budget. I think I'm going to start by saying that I disagree with both Chair Gibbs and Supervisor Dickinson, so I don't think I'm going to make any friends this evening. But in regards to the mandate of service, that is a standard that we're going to have to keep looking at rigorously going forward. We started looking at that with the priority-based budgeting years ago. I really tried to convince the board and Administrator Carger that we need to invest more in gathering data. I'm hoping with the addition of a data officer, we can continue to analyze the resources that we put into various county programs. I know that over time, as we analyze them, we start to discover that there was a majority of programs that were mandated by statute. So that speaks to the level of service points that Supervisor Shafinsky and yourself had brought up. The other part, as far as the availability of information in the budget process, this is a very large budget. It is very complex. We all agree on that. If we were to move to a situation where we did not have committees that were tasked with having these policy discussions periodically throughout the month, and we were moving to a system where it was more centralized, that makes things even more difficult. And that's where I fear some of these discussions may go. We have to trust the committee system. And I'm just going to end by saying that a lot of these discussions are really things that we have to address in the coming year. Not right now. We have to trust the process right now. We have to ask questions. We have to ask good questions. We have to request information that's needed. All that is public record. That's open to anybody that wants it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Baker.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So I watched the executive committee meeting where a supervisor asked about mandated and non-mandated services. And I have to say that I was appalled with the reaction to that request. That made me the least happy or proud to be on the board of anything I've experienced in the last 6 months. I think the people who you probably know who you are, so I'm not going to make any names. But I wasn't going to read this, but because of that response and reminding me of that, so I believe this is a mandated service that we're not providing. This is out of our audit report. So it is on, I'm not sure which page, but it's in the 2021 audit, which is under the finance department. Prior year points, missing key controls. There are certain controls that are not currently, and again, this is a prior year. This has been about 5 years, I believe, probably more. Missing key controls. There are certain controls that are not currently in place related to transaction cycles and financial reporting. As a result, there is a risk that erroneous or unauthorized transactions or misstatements could occur without the knowledge of management or the governing body. Our recommendation for strengthening controls are listed below. Controls over financial reporting. The current financial accounting system is not able to generate a report from management and the oversight body to review actuals compared to budget and prior periods. This review is a critical process in determining adherence to the budget, developing and revising expectations, and monitoring activity. Since the controls listed above or other compensating controls are not currently in place, errors or irregularities could occur as part of the accounting processes that might not be discovered by the management or the governing body. Therefore, the absence of these controls is considered to be a material weakness. We recommend that a designated employee review these potential controls and determine whether additional controls should be implemented. This determination should take into consideration a cost-benefit analysis. Current year status, this comment is still valid. So for those that are not familiar with accounting terminology, material means that this is a significant issue that needs to be addressed. And again, I think this has been probably the fifth, I don't want to say, but it's multiple years that this has been going on. Thank you.
Supervisor Robinson, Chair of Finance, will address the point that Supervisor Baker is making.
I think that those are legitimate concerns. And John Rader from Baker Tilly has raised those discussions or those issues with both our committee and we've had private discussions relative to those concerns. And I think part of it gets into the limitations of Kayenta and the fact that we're keeping manually entered ledgers and moving information from one ledger to another. The ERP process in the new accounting system should more than adequately address those concerns going forward. In the context, that new system will also give us the ability to get into the priority-based budgeting concept that we had adopted as a board a few years ago, working with a firm out of Colorado. But we found that there were limitations on how we collect and how we collected information, costed out programs. So this new system will give us better information. And I tell this story, but it's not facetious, but when I was elected to the board in 1974, before Kayenta, we had better information to the board than we do today. And that's not a good sign. We've been looking at changing and updating the system. We are in that process. It takes time. It takes time to develop that system, enter the information. One of the reasons we didn't get into health insurance this year and do as comprehensive a study was the concern over the workload in HR and finance, who are struggling to get this new system up and operational that will give us better ability to deal with those accountability and transparency issues going forward. So I'm hopeful that the ERP process will make our job easier going forward. And I also want to pick up on Supervisor Dickinson's comments. I think both of us listened with interest to the process that Sheboygan County embarked on in trying to get the county board involved earlier. I think that's a commitment that I'd like to make to the board, that we will look at trying to do something early next summer where we bring the board and begin in earnest the discussions on the development of the 2024 budget consistent with their approach.
And I will also comment, Supervisor Baker brings up a great point. The notice that the auditors put in the audit report is a valid report, is a valid notice, has been discussed by HR Finance and the Finance Committee and the Finance Department year after year, and had a discussion with the auditor, Mr. Rader, from Baker Tilly, and the implementation of Workday, along with some processes that have been changed, is going to address that, and that may or should, will not disappear next year. I guarantee that that report will show up. However, once the implementation of Workday is reviewed for audit, then that will disappear. And at least that was discussed with Mr. Rader as far as will Workday and the changes that Workday are bringing forward address the concerns that are there in the audit report? And the answer was yes. Any other discussion on the budget? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to standing committee chairs or designees. Any announcements? Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick update on the Infrastructure Committee meeting from October 6th. We received an update from Commissioner Griesbach and Parks Director Jamie Polly on the Marathon County Rural Bike Route Network map. And real quickly, the map is on the agenda for the Infrastructure Committee. But quickly, what it is a outline of Marathon County trying to link parks to different cities and areas in the county, and trying to do it in the safest way that they could, as far as designating some roads that are not as heavily trafficked or traveled with traffic. And it was brought up several times that bicyclists can get on their bike and ride wherever they want, and that's true. But it also aids the highway department when it comes to funding for new improvements on our roads. If we're going to add any bike paths or anything like that, that would be in those bike route areas. So as a preliminary map, there was a lot of discussion from the committee, but we ultimately did approve this map, and if you want to see it, it is on the agenda. We also approved the jurisdictional transfer of 1,600 feet of County Highway B in the village of Marathon, which is South Road in Marathon City. The village of Marathon City will be taking over jurisdiction of those 1,600 feet after the road is improved. It does need some repairs, and there's a fiscal responsibility or cost to the county before that road is turned over to Marathon City, and that's $140,000. That's in the packet to vote on Tuesday, so would appreciate you to look at that. Once the road is turned over to Marathon City, the county doesn't have to plow it or improve it or has no more responsibilities. to take care of that road. And we also had a closed discussion on purchase of possible property for future building sites. There was no action taken on that. It was just informational for the committee. So anybody have any questions? Thank you.
Any other standing committee chairs or designees? Reports? Okay. Move on to review and discussion on Tuesday meeting agenda items, ordinances. Under item 9A1, Town of Spencer rezone, Larry and Patricia Lang. Ordinance 26-22. Any questions? Okay, under item 9A2, the Town of McMillan rezone, Tim Vreeland on behalf of Don Sabastine. Any discussion? And moving on to item 9A3, Town of Holton rezone, Jason Pfluger and Danielle and Jennifer Schreiber. Ordinance 028-22. Any questions? Moving on to item 9A4, revisions to Marathon County General Code, Chapter 6, Ordinance 29-22. The Corp Council would like to address the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point something out. In these revisions to Chapter 6, there's a scrivener's error, which is solely attributable to me. Section 6.03 is titled Local Emergency Management Committee. It should be Local Emergency Planning Committee. I had emergency management in my mind because that's what this chapter is, so I wrote management instead of planning. That will be corrected and updated for your Tuesday packet.
Okay, any other questions on that ordinance 29-22? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that one section on that committee being added, what is the reasoning for adding this committee?
Corp Counsel will answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This actually is a committee that's in existence and has been for many years. It's mandated by federal law that each county have a local emergency planning committee, and that committee is charged with addressing planning for emergencies in the county. Most often they meet quarterly to discuss spills and hazardous events that have occurred in the county. They work with the emergency management director. So what didn't exist, the local emergency planning committee is referenced elsewhere in your county board rules, but it's actually not created and its membership hasn't previously been outlined in ordinance. So this would serve to outline, what the actual membership is, and what the terms of the members are. None of that had previously existed for this committee that's been in existence.
Any other questions on that ordinance and Chapter 6 change? Okay, we'll move on to resolutions from Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee. Item 9B, 1A. Approve the 2022 budget transfers for Marathon County Department of Appropriations. Resolution 58-22. Any questions? Supervisor Sandalski.
So is this the one for the funding of the library? Is this the resolution we're talking about?
These are the budget transfers.
Okay. Yeah, as far as, I believe it's on the library one here, for funding the library. Yeah, as a county supervisor, I attended the last library.
Supervisor, could you provide context? I don't see a budget transfer that has anything to do with the
Oh,
library.
am I in the wrong one? Sorry. Oh, okay. Maybe I'm looking.
All right. Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in the HR Finance meeting, the question was actually divided for these budget transfers. There were actually two motions, separate motions for both of those. So I was wondering why it's presented to us combined, where HR Finance handled it separately.
I would say, and the clerk is indicating that she'll own that. And we'll have those two separate next time. But there was also, the finance director will explain.
In the finance committee, there was additional budget transfers that referred to the ADRC. And those have a separate governing board. So that governing board is responsible for making that approval. We bring them to the finance committee of Marathon County so that there's a oversight committee that sees that we are making those transfers within the system. So those would not need to be forwarded directly to you. Their county board, their governing board took care of those.
So the clerk is corrected that she did provide it the correct way. There isn't a second. So I stand corrected. Any other discussion? Okay, next would be item 9B, 1B, approve and authorize the implementation of the class compensation plan created by the McGrath Consulting Group, Inc. Resolution 59-22. Any discussion? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bring this forward a bit. So I guess I guess where I am with the study, I understand we haven't done this in 10 years or 12 years or so. What are the current ranges that we have, and how significant of an uptick are these ranges? And does it apply to every position?
The ranges should be included in the packet, and previous
But the previous ranges or the current ranges are not.
Correct. They were in the previous HR Finance and Property packet, but I can actually show you where those are available, and then I won't characterize what the range movements are, because I think my definition of what may be significant and what may not would be perhaps different than each of yours. But under our website, all of our policies relative to class compensation exist under Employee Resources, under Policies and Procedures. Chapter 5 is compensation, and the classification listing is a PDF, and you can peruse the positions at your leisure. You can see that one of the changes we made, and this was in direction from our consultant, was to really work to reduce the total number of classifications that we had. And Molly probably knows the number off the top of her head, what the number, she's saying no. But it's a substantial reduction in the overall number of classifications we had. We tried to enhance consistency across departments. You'll also see some of the nomenclature is changed, but all of the ranges are publicly available on the website. I'd be happy to send the link to that classification PDF after today's meeting.
Okay, thank you. So an additional question is, does the compensation plan, these ranges, or anything in the compensation, does it include any benefits? Does it have a comparison of like health insurance or retirement or anything like that, or is it simply wages?
I think it's a little bit of a complex question. The McGrath analysis did not evaluate our benefits in calculating, in looking at the comparables. They didn't compare benefits. However, I want to make very clear that the wages, the salary figures here are gross figures. So in the budget message, I provide a graph that shows, or a chart that shows the employee contribution for health insurance, for example, or the employee share for retirement. Those would come out of
Their share.
their share would come out of the dollar amounts that are listed. So all deductions come out after. This is a gross compensation. But to your specific question about did they evaluate what the health insurance contribution for example, for the airport, the Rochester was utilized as a comparable. They didn't compare what the overall value was of the Rochester health insurance benefit or their retirement plan. They did that based on compensation only. I should say wages only.
Okay, Supervisor Baker.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So I have a suggestion, and I'm on page 77 of the packet, which is page 18 of the study. So I'm in the automation business. Basically, our business is driven by tight labor markets, and we are a leading indicator. So the last quite a few years, business has been really driven by people can't find employees, just like our county. We are now in a position where automation projects are being dropped because that is no longer the case. We're getting projects that are abandoned or are put on hold because there's no longer a shortage of labor in, this is not necessarily a local market. But we also, in the news, everybody I'm sure has seen that we have a few hundred employees we're going to be losing in our positions. Employees are going to be looking for different jobs. So we don't know what this is going to look like in the next few years. So I would ask if it would make sense to consider, instead of setting the average market at 12% into the range, that we would set the average market at 20% into the range, and then we would have a 48% range and a 43% range. So the midpoint would stay the same. The top end would stay the same, but the bottom end would be 8% lower. And I'm not suggesting that we change the 1.5 million. I'm not suggesting that we change the overall, impact on the budget. But if the economy does change and all of a sudden we're in a labor surplus instead of a labor shortage market, that would give the county the option to make offers for new employees at a lower rate. So, and I don't claim to be a compensation expert, so I would welcome feedback. Thank you.
Administrator Lerner, please.
I'm not sure I fully appreciate the question, but shifting right now the range is based on, we have the market compensation, and they did an analysis of our minimums. And as demonstrated in the data from a graph, that the real issue we had was one of the ranges. And when you look at this graph, for example, you have 81% of our ranges were below the market minimums. And when you look at when you look further in the document, you'll see that we've been working around our compensation schedule as it existed for some time. So that is, I think, a good indicator of the opportunity we have with these shifts in range is to bring people in at a more appropriate minimum and utilize the schedule and the mechanism that it's truly intended, which is to move people through that scale based on their performance, which is our pay for performance model, over time. The other struggle we had with our past schedule is that it was really not feasible based on the amount of money that was being allocated through the annual budget process to get to market in an appropriate amount of time. We had market was, initially it was set at the midpoint, halfway between the minimum and maximum, and we had large ranges. You'd have to, based on the 2.3 it was 2% and then 2.3% and 3% over the last three budgets respectively that were put in for pay for performance. Quite simply, that has not kept pace with the market. The best indicator of how our system can work effectively, if you look at our sheriff's office, our deputies, this was discussed at HR Finance. We look at those rates for deputies in terms of pay increases every couple of years. As I indicated, every 3 years. We recently negotiated a 3-year contract. And through that negotiation process, what you do is you sit down, you look at markets and comparables with the bargaining unit. And our recent effort there demonstrated, hey, we're in a good place. We did 3% increases over the next 3 years. I think the schedule as it exists, to your point, it is not beyond where the market is today. It is set at where the market was when they pulled the comp data, which was several months ago. I mean, one of the things Milena referenced to the HR Finance Committee, our data is out of date today. But to your point, I think it gets us closer to where we need to be. It gets us at market. What I don't want to do as your administrator is, I want a schedule that we can implement, that's financially sustainable to implement. And I believe the schedule before you, we can do that. And second, I understand the direction I've received from you is we're not going to be in a position like the private market. I think to your underlying point, if the market changes drastically on the private side, they will reduce wages. That has not been our history in Marathon County. However, we're also not outpacing the market like you're seeing in other sectors with 10, 15% increases. If you look at recent data, those individuals that have left employment in the last several years have received double-digit increases in overall compensation. We're not doing that. I think we're getting ourselves to a competitive place. We will address what we need to do in the next several years. I also think we're in a very good place with health insurance. I know a number of you are in the HR-related fields. What we've seen, and I think what is a sound strategy on the private sector side, is that they are utilizing health insurance and employee contribution and employer contribution as ways to adapt quickly when necessary. There are a number of employers locally that have gone to 0% employee contributions for health care to keep their wages where they need to be and provide additional, in essence, compensation to employees. We haven't changed our health insurance contribution for employees. I know that's a long, rambling answer, but I don't necessarily think that moving the market further in the range is the right thing. We have seen and Milena made that clear, we need a strategy where people come into our organization at an appropriate minimum and that they can see a path to get to that market compensation. And our path is 7 years of sound performance. That's our implementation strategy to get to that percentile.
So I think you misunderstood what I was suggesting.
I apologize.
So my suggestion, the midpoint would not change. The upper end would not change. The amount of raises that we would give to the employees would not change. What would change would be the minimum, and it would go down by 8%. So because the upper end would not change, that would mean the bandwidth would be wider. And if we only hire people at the minimum, then my suggestion I would retract. But I was under understanding that we could hire people anywhere between the minimum and the midpoint. So what this would give is the county flexibility. If the economy did turn bad, if there was a labor shortage, that future people, so it wouldn't impact our current employees, it would just be future hires could be brought in at a 8% lower level.
Sure. I think I appreciate the question. Based on the minimums and what the labor market looks like, and I certainly defer to Molly if she has anything to add, I don't think our minimums are that we have room to move down. a library page, for example, $13.60. We have positions that are, you can start in a lot of places making $24, $26, $28 an hour. And I guess I don't see the benefit of reducing the minimums based on the analysis that McGrath did and their rationale for why she set the ranges the way they did. But I think I appreciate the point now. You were simply looking to move the minimum lower for each of these.
I think one of the.
And it wouldn't be based off today's, I agree that today the labor rates, they are not too low. I'm saying is that given the inflation rate, given the economic outlook, that within 3 years, unfortunately, they may be, I'm sorry, they're not too high, I meant to say. But I'm looking at potential changes in the next few years because of inflation, because of the way the economy may change. So it was just to give the county an option to be able to have more flexibility if things do change.
Sure.
As of today, it wouldn't have any impact. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I do believe that it would create one additional challenge potentially, though, and that would be an internal equity for current staff versus an employee being brought in. So in other words, if somebody is brought in today for an administrative assistant at minimum at $17.57, and 3 years from now, because that's current market minimum, and we set the minimum market at 8% below, we're going to bring that individual in at 8% below that when we brought somebody in 2 years earlier or a year earlier or 3 years earlier at a higher starting point. I think that creates some internal equity challenges that the employer would realize. Supervisor Langenhan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And there's good analysis on all sides here. The other thing I was going to make a point of was in regards to when positions are posted, and Lance or Molly can speak to this, but the ranges are posted in those positions, right? Where you have the min and the max, correct? Yep. So the potential problem I see is that, if you are in a situation where maybe we are behind as opposed to ahead, if you see if you have a potential job applicant that's looking at the min and they see that the 8% lower, that range is out there, there's no way that they're going to apply for our job. And then having to explain that in the job description of that, range there for starting, that's going to create a lot of headache for the job pool applicants. Thank you.
I think that's a very good point. I think that's a very good point. And the other thing I'll say with the benefit of having in our conversations with McGrath, again, I don't think our minimums are too high, but they're market appropriate. Right now, our process has been, we've had to hire above minimum, not because the individual, to Supervisor Baker's point, had skills in the area that warranted placing them further in the range. It's simply because there's no way we can hire at the minimum for the position. I would welcome the ability to say, hey, we have somebody with 4 or 5 years of experience doing this job or very comparable skills, and that warrants putting them in further to the range. The simple reality for a lot of our positions, people weren't, to your point, Supervisor Langenheim, weren't applying or weren't willing to accept a position even though they had no direct skills within that work area. So I think this gets us to a place where we can be more competitive in that entry-level position. And we did work very hard, and I don't know if it's readily apparent here, but we worked very hard as a leadership team to make sure that we tried to have as many entry-level positions within departments as possible, because I think that's really important. To Chair Gibbs's point, compensation is important, but one of the big things that you'll see in the analysis that Molly did and through her exit interviews is it's really important to show individuals a path, right? A career path to remain with an organization. And that was one of the other thought processes we had. So we wanted to make sure that we had entry-level positions within our departments and that they could see growth not only within the department, but growth potential across our organization, moving from one department to another.
Other discussions on the authorization of the implementation of the class compensation plan created by McGrath? Resolution, again, 59-22. Any discussion? Any further discussion? Okay, we will move on from Infrastructure Committee. Item 9B, 2A, approval of the jurisdictional transfer of a portion of County Highway B. Resolution 60-22. Vice Chair McEwen had spoke about that. That would be a jurisdictional transfer of 1,600 feet of Highway B to the Village of Marathon. Okay, we will move on from Public Safety Committee. Item 9B, 3A, adopting the Marathon County All Hazards Mitigation Plan update. Resolution 61-22. Okay, moving on to item 9B, 3B, a resolution requesting the state of Wisconsin to review and revise the entry-level compensation rate for assistant district attorneys. Resolution 62-22. Any questions? And last but not least, item 9B, 3C, to adopt an emergency management plan for Marathon County 2022. Resolution 63-22. Any questions? All right, we are down to item number 10, announcements and/or requests. Okay, we are down to item number 11. What is your pleasure? Vice Chair McEwen has made the motion to adjourn. Is there a second? The second is Supervisor Drabeck. Any discussion? All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed? No? And we are adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.